Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, I'm not Penn State, so I'm doing just fine on this Michigan Monday, but others, maybe not so much.
Now, I'm not sure what you mean by that, because when I was watching the game, I saw Penn State return an interception to take a 14-13 lead, and then I had to go do some stuff, and I missed the rest of the game. I assume Penn State held on.
Yeah, I think that was it because my cable went out at that point, so it was like, I don't know. I mean, just projecting the score forward, Penn State wins, about like 35-31, like closer than expected, but yeah. I assume. Anyway, great episode. Talk to you tomorrow.
But, just sad luck for those Michigan Wolverines once again losing to Penn State. No, yes, Michigan held on to win 41-17. And at some point, I'm going to go through this season and look at the second half scoring margins for the Wolverines because they wear on opponents, and that's exactly what they did in this one, outscoring Penn State 25-3 in the second half, which in a game itself might be a scoregami. The whole 25-point thing there, it's a little bit odd, but they did have a 2-pointer in there as well. But a dominating performance by Michigan, the score not indicative of how much Penn State was brutalized in this game. And the fact that Penn State even had 14 points in the second half was a gift from the defense and a gift from the offense, both of those gifts coming from Michigan, of course, as the Wolverines rush for 418 yards in this one, go crazy, only throw for 145 yards. But, Tom, your overall thoughts on what you saw, what this means, just your takeaway.
I think, you said, closer to the score indicated, obviously a little sarcastically there. This one, if this one was 41-3, I think it would have been probably a more accurate representation of what we saw on the field. It was just Penn State needed the one quarterback run from Sean Clifford, and then the pick six, the tipped pick six. Other than that, it was like, what exactly are you feeling good about right now coming out of this game if you're Penn State? Otherwise, because they got whooped on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I mean, whooped. It's so interesting because this is very clearly exactly what Jim Harbaugh has wanted to do since he got there. He got there in 2015. There were 5 years where it was just like, here's what we're going to do. And then they kind of did it in 2016, but, couldn't get over the hump. And they certainly weren't running the ball like this in 2016. And they just had year after year of just like, oh, look, it's John O'Corn. Hey, everybody, John O'Corn. Oh, look, Wilton Spate's good for 3 weeks. Well, look at this. Oh, well, maybe we're going to turn the corner. And it was just, and then just completely just face plant and step on a rake against Ohio State. And, just constant. They were a little more Outback Bowl adjacent than you probably would have expected when Harbaugh took the job. And then all of a sudden, after a completely ridiculous lost 2020 season, it's just like all of a sudden like, oh, now Jim Harbaugh's remembered how to do this, and now it's fine again. And they've changed coordinators. You have a different starting quarterback than you did last year. You lost a couple of high draft picks off last year's team. And now it's like, oh, could he just potentially do this exact thing moving forward for a while? And then the question is, so is he going to go to the NFL after this year? Because it feels like he might want to go to the NFL again this year. And there's some open jobs in the NFL, and I don't know who else from the college ranks they're going to hire. And it's such a fascinating just status of this program right now that you've been waiting so long for this to happen. It's finally like, oh, it's happened. It's happening right now. It's happening right before your eyes. But then he desperately wanted to get out after last year. And then is he going to want to do that again this year? I don't know. And then, I mean, we can talk about this later, but man, the stakes on the Ohio State-Michigan game this year, holy Moses, there's going to be a program facing the same kind of existential dread after that game that Penn State is probably facing right now.
Yeah, we've got a listener questions episode planned for tomorrow, and you look at like half of the questions in there about Ohio State and Michigan, and what does, like, can Ohio State stop the run? Will they have to do this to stop Michigan's run? And you look at what they did. Like I said, they had over 400 yards rushing. The fourth time they've done that since 2009. Once against Delaware State, once against Bowling Green, once against Rutgers in 2016. And this is like the first real live opponent they've done that to. And it wasn't, there were like, two 60-yard runs in there, but that's 120 yards. They still rushed for another 300 yards in addition to those big runs. And it was really, really impressive. And the offensive line dominated. Penn State was outnumbered so often. You'd see there was one play where I think they had the strength was to the left. The strength of Michigan's running game was to the left. And then they basically like run to the short side, which is the weak side in this alignment. And they bring the guard in the center around, and you've just got two blockers on two defenders, and there's no help. There was so little help waiting in the wings for Penn State's defense. And, our buddy, Marcus Hartman DMing us like, this is a really poor performance by Manny Diaz. And it's like, yes, it was defensive coordinator for Penn State. But I guess I'll start with Blake Corum. 28 carries for 166 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, 61-yard long, only lost 6 yards. He gets like he sees everything. Like he sees the hole really, really well. And he gets there and he sees holes that aren't there and can get through those. Just really, really impressive. My concern for him now, though, Tom, and I don't have this right in front of me, but he's averaged about 30 touches a game for 4 weeks straight. Now, I think that's okay because now they're off, and their schedule is such. They're off this week. The schedule is such as like they're not going to be tested again for a little while, so they don't need to continue to do that to him. They can get Donovan Edwards in there more, which they did this week. But I think I have bagged on maybe Jim Harbaugh's strategy in the past, but they've gotten through this. The heavy load on Blake Corum in this tough, quote unquote, tough stretch of games. They've gotten through it. He's looked good doing it. And I think now the load on him will lessen, but his production might not drop,
Well, I think you might see them manage Blake Corum's carries the way that Urban Meyer used to manage JT Barrett's carries, and not quite to the same degree. Like Urban Meyer he'd run JT Barrett 18 times when they were playing at Penn State, and then 3 times when they were playing Indiana or Bowling Green or whoever. And, you're at the point where you don't need to dial it back quite to that degree, but you don't need to give him 28 carries when you're playing. Who do they have on the back half of the schedule? It's not a whole heck of a lot coming up. I remember that. Michigan State, the Michigan State game might be interesting just because it's the Michigan State game, and sometimes weird stuff happens there. But it feels like what Michigan's back half of their schedule should just be, you get the week off, and then you just kind of like march through, just kind of take care of business. I feel like you've sort of seen that from Michigan, where Michigan will look one way when they're playing Rutgers, and it's like they beat Rutgers 20-13 last year, and you look at it and say, oh boy, what's wrong with Michigan? What's wrong with Michigan? It's like, oh, nothing's wrong with Michigan. They're just kind of, they're just doing enough to win, and then when they need to come out and put the pedal down against a Penn State, oh, don't worry, they can put the pedal down against Penn State and absolutely stomp them. It feels like we're going to be doing a lot of these shows the next few weeks where it's going to be like, wow, a closer than expected win for Michigan over fill in the blank crappy team. But I don't know that we're going to learn that much because I have a feeling you're going to see some of the stuff sort of dialed back and just kind of keep guys healthy. If they come in healthy for that Ohio State game, that is going to be, Tony, I think that's going to be a game that there is some anticipation for. That is my professional opinion.
We'll talk about that game later on down the road. Just calm down. We talked on the morning show about the close games that Alabama has had in the Power 5 the last 2 years, where I think I said like 8 or 9 games were won by a score or less. Michigan last year and this year, I think they've played in like 5 games that were decided by 1 score or less. And now, granted, the Big Ten and the SEC are not the same. I will readily admit that. And playing Texas this year is not the same as playing Connecticut or anybody on Michigan's schedule. And Ohio State is like one of 5 teams in the Power 5 to not even play a ranked team this year. And Ohio State may not play a ranked team this year until Michigan, depending on what Penn State does against Minnesota this year. And who even knows if Penn State will stay ranked after they get through this season. So like Michigan may be the only team, and that includes the Big Ten championship game if Ohio State gets there. Like Michigan may be the only ranked opponent in the first 13 games for the Buckeyes this year. So I'm not saying that Ohio State's schedule is tough or anything. It's not, but you look at what, what Michigan has played, and it's not as tough as Alabama's. That's the gist of what I'm saying there, but still impressive that they are just, they wear on teams, and it's the first half of games is so much different than the second half. And I don't know if it's diabolical or just lazy by Jim Harbaugh.
Well, I don't know if it's either one of those necessarily. There's a certain amount of what they do that's just going to kind of wear you out. And I feel like you sort of saw with the Utah USC game on Saturday, it felt a little bit like in the second half of that game, the first half of the game was, look at all our shiny new transfers. And then, the shiny new transfers start to get sleepy. And then you have to put in the backups, and the backups aren't quite as good. And then, and there's just, the depth isn't there. So either you're playing the guys who aren't as good, or you're playing the guys who are kind of worn down. That felt like that was kind of what happened with Penn State, where Penn State's frontline defense is, it's okay. And they got run over too, don't worry. But there's not necessarily the depth there. That's where one of the great questions, and I swear, Tony, I'm not going to turn every question into an Ohio State question here, but also, I don't think any Michigan fans who are watching this are going, I want to hear more about how this will impact the game against, I don't know, if they still have Rutgers on the schedule. I literally can't remember all the garbage they played.
At Rutgers.
Oh, Tony, trap game? Who's to say? Maybe, probably not. But, I think one of the great unanswered questions right now is the depth for Ohio State on the defensive front. They don't play a lot of linebackers, but they rotate a lot of defensive linemen. So maybe that makes it harder for Michigan to wear those guys down. Because I do think that's a big part of what they do in the second half is they just wear you down. They just grind you down. And then eventually, the 6-yard, 8-yard gains in the first half turn into 61 and 67-yard gains in the second half. I think that's certainly a piece of that, which then the way Larry Johnson rotates that defensive front, maybe that changes things a little bit makes that a little harder in the second half for Michigan down in Columbus.
Donovan Edwards rushes for 173 yards on 16 attempts, had a 67-yard touchdown, scored twice on a day. Got him more involved. He was injured for a couple of games, and then they're working him back. So those two together, rushing for basically, 340 yards, not bad, 339 yards. J.J. McCarthy getting in there, 57 yards rushing on 7 attempts, 1 sack, so 6 for 62 basically on the read options and some scrambles. He's just really effective when he's doing that, as long as he's not trying to do too much. And we saw him get away with one of those where he tried to do too much, and he basically was getting sacked, and he just threw it up for grabs. Blake Corum caught it and, picked up some yards, but that was one of those where that dangerous J.J. McCarthy is still in there. And I think he's going to be in there for a long time because that's part of his nature, I think.
Well, and I'm going to hit on Blake Corum real quick before I move to J.J. McCarthy. Blake Corum, the leg drive from Blake Corum, he just moves piles. That is just so impressive. It looks miserable to try and tackle him. Just like that is just not going to be a good time. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And also Mike Hart. Good to see Mike Hart back on the sidelines after a very scary incident at Indiana the week before. So, yes, good to see him back there as well. McCarthy, I feel like I've been saying the same thing about J.J. McCarthy for 2 years now, which is, incredible talent, great arm, can make some really nice throws, really a good threat with his legs. He has been the best football player on the field probably his entire life for basically just about every game. Maybe one here or there, but he has just been able to get away with stuff for so long that you can just see him going like, this is probably a terrible idea, but I'm pretty good, so I could probably make this happen. You mentioned the one, it was 13 minutes left in the second quarter. He's getting pulled down and just threw it up and threw it over a Penn State defender who, if he had caught it, was just going to score immediately, just an immediate pick six. And, I mean, yeah, like you can believe in your arm, but if you're getting dragged down, there's a whole bunch of different physics working there against you where you've really got to believe in yourself. And that was almost a disaster. That was on a first down. That was not a desperate third down. Well, we have to do this or we're going to have to punt the ball away. That was first down. There was another one earlier in the game. He was like on his back foot and threw it into traffic with the ball in Penn State territory. There's no reason to do that. And there was one where he was sitting in the pocket forever. It was like literally 5 seconds sitting in the pocket waiting. And I think Roman Wilson was open on that one, but he couldn't see him behind the offensive line. But he just sits back there and then gets drilled from behind right as he threw it. And you got to have the clock going in your head. And he's just sort of been able to just do stuff. You can kind of get the sense. He's just sort of been able to do stuff and make stuff happen for his whole career. And eventually that does catch up with you. You will try to do too much. Ironically, the pick six was not necessarily his fault. I mean, he threw it into traffic, but it was a little bit of a wonky thing where I think 3 different guys touched it before someone actually caught it. But, he's really talented, showed incredible resilience coming back after the pick six and you're down 14-13 and you could, as a young quarterback, you could have that turn into an, oh, here we go kind of thing. Very much didn't. He bounced back against Indiana last week too. But man, there was one later where he did the same thing, but it was because they had a defensive lineman offsides and he knew he had a free play. So that, I'm not talking about that one, but he tries to do too much. And so often it's on first down and second down where it's like, okay, we're going to take a shot on first down. You've got to be willing to throw the ball away. You have to be willing to throw the ball away. That was something that Ryan Day talked about with Justin Fields. Like you got to recognize, like, either run it, throw it away, live to fight another day, especially in first downs. And McCarthy's he's just not quite there yet right now with that. And that will cost them at some point if he doesn't get there. I'm sure Jim Harbaugh is in his ear saying, listen, don't do it. Jim Harbaugh didn't look real happy on the one that we were talking about with, him getting kind of dragged down and flinging it to Blake Corum. But that's like JJ McCarthy is, the JJ McCarthy giveth and JJ McCarthy taketh away. It's like you can see him, having a big mistake in a big moment if he doesn't dial that back just a little bit.
And he was 17 of 24 passing for 145 yards with an interception. He was sacked once. Of his 24 passes, 18 of them traveled 5 yards or less in the air. He threw 5 passes that went at least 10 yards in the air. He was 2 of 5 on those. And he had 1 6-yard complete, or one pass that went 6 yards, because just charting it, just looking for anything. And it's like so many short passes. He's not been really able to hit the tight windows downfield. Now, he had a fantastic throw on the run on the sideline. I think it was to Ronnie Bell, or Roman Wilson. And he has, it almost feels like there are times where he throws the ball better on the run. Maybe it was Cornelius Johnson. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm just looking through the box score, but when he's not thinking and he's just playing and he's on the run and he just lets it go, I think there's more there. And then sometimes I wonder how much he is being told by his coaches to be careful, which maybe slows him down a little, because, like I said, you don't really see him hit these tight windows. He needs guys to be more open, and I don't know how often he's throwing guys open. It's hard to throw guys open when you're throwing a 4-yard route, or it's 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and it's a vast difference between watching Ohio State's passing offense versus Michigan's, and they both work, and one offense isn't necessarily better than the other. But we see one thing in Ohio State's passing offense, and we see a completely different thing in Michigan's passing offense. And it's like the passing game for Michigan is there to support the running game and to keep that less predictable, I think, and then find some chunks here and there. But yeah, I think the longest pass downfield went about 32 yards, and that was on the rollout that what was completed. And again, a fantastic throw. But other than that, it is concerning, but also, is he being held back, or is this Jim Harbaugh knowing and the offensive coordinators knowing like this is what we know what we're doing because this is what he's best at, and we don't want him getting too out of pocket, especially in these close early games, which don't end up being close in the second half.
Well, and this is another interesting piece of this where has Ohio State gotten stressed on defense? Where has Ohio State given up big plays? It hasn't been a bunch of like short catches with long yak. It has been, you heave one downfield and a defensive back is out of position or something like that. And, you've seen Ohio State give up a bunch of a bunch of long plays where the ball's in the air 30, 40 yards. That feels like, this ties into the great unanswered question from before about if Ohio State's defensive line depth will, allow them to hold up better against Michigan's run game, especially in the second half. Okay, if Ohio State's weakness defensively is getting thrown on downfield, is that something that Michigan can take advantage of? Because we really haven't seen it, and you really didn't see it last year. This is something that I remember talking about with Cade McNamara last year, where they would throw like one ball downfield to Cornelius Johnson, and that was it. And like, okay, good, cross that off the list. Happy, Merry Christmas, Happy Thanksgiving. We threw one ball down the field. It's great, and now we can keep running the ball and throwing to the tight end 5 yards downfield. It didn't catch up with them last year. Well, until the Georgia game when it did. But it didn't catch up with them last year until the college football playoff. I feel like that's something you're going to have to see. And I don't think it's just he can do this and we're just choosing not to do this. It just feels like that might not be one of his strengths right now is like long, accurate, deep passes downfield, which is, if they can't run the ball the way that other teams have against Ohio State, or the way they have against other teams, maybe that becomes an issue against Ohio State. I feel like if you're playing Michigan, you need to bring your guys up in the box, say, we are going to stop the run. And, maybe you're giving up a couple long runs as a result of that. And, someone gets through and you don't have a guy back. But Penn State felt like they were sitting back for the most part, not really trying to, really, really focus on stopping the run. And Michigan still hit a couple big ones in the second half. So apparently that's not a good strategy. So maybe try something else. So I would be really interested to see a team just load up the box, 8 guys in the box, and say, go ahead and beat us deep. Go ahead, go hit play cover 0, 20 snaps. I don't know, 15 snaps. Like just make them beat you deep and see what happens. Because letting Michigan just run over you for 400 yards, that also is not a winning game plan.
No, it's not. Now we'll say that it was a little gusty, a little windy, 15-mile-per-hour winds, they said. But I think as evidence why you should force Michigan to throw the ball and bring the defense up front, when Penn State was backed up into the red zone, when Michigan was in Penn State's red zone, and you have a defense that is more pushed forward towards the offense, Michigan failed 4 times in there, had to kick 4 red zone field goals. So when the defense is more compressed and more closer to the line of scrimmage and it isn't as far back, guess what happened? Michigan's offense didn't play as well. And I think that's a pretty big tell. If at this point you know the running game can beat you, you don't know if J.J. McCarthy's arm can beat you. Now he can make every throw, but you don't know if he's going to make it at that point. Like he can throw the ball everywhere, but you don't know if the windows are going to be hit or what he's going to do with that, or if he's not going to see something and he's going to wait and get sacked. Like, the running game can hurt you. So that would seem to be like, yes, we will not be outnumbered at the line of scrimmage. We will not be outnumbered in the box, and we will be even numbered in the secondary and see what happens.
Well, I think this is, I feel like this whole show has been me going, well, here's the 4 things that Michigan's doing terribly and that are really could really doom them in the future. And it's like, okay, let me reiterate. I was the one last week who was like, I think they beat Penn State by multiple scores. I think they're much better than Penn State. So at this point, like, welcome to like, this is Ohio State level. Like, yeah, you're supposed to whomp everyone you play. So this is the way we talk about Ohio State too, where it's like, yeah, they're really good. Like, you don't hear us talking every game about like, oh, wow, CJ Stroud, he's incredible. Like, okay, well, CJ Stroud, like, well, that was just kind of a, normal CJ Stroud game. It was fine. It was like, yeah, 6 touchdowns. Like, okay, welcome to big boy football. This is how you get talked about now. So, with McCarthy, we talked about some of the, can he make the downfield throws? We talked about, some of the other stuff that you've seen with him over the years. Michigan's red zone has been a little bit of a concern this year. They have bogged down there in a way that Ohio State sort of bogged down in the red zone last year as well. And that's the kind of thing that, again, in these you're going to be fine against Rutgers. No one is concerned about Rutgers. It's when you're in these big games, field goals are not going to beat Ohio State this year. Field goals for Ohio State are not going to beat Michigan this year. And Ohio State in the red zone this year has been outstanding. Ohio State has been really, really good in the red zone this year. I think they've scored 100%, and I think they've kicked 2 field goals in the red zone all year, and it's like 22 touchdowns out of 24 red zone trips or something like that. You can't kick 4 field goals against Ohio State. Think back to all the games where you watch teams kick field goals in the first half. I'll throw Michigan fans a cookie here since I'm being so mean to them all show. Remember the 1996 Ohio State-Michigan game where Ohio State just completely dominated Michigan in the first half and kicked 3 field goals? How'd that work out for them? Probably not great. Not strictly speaking great is how that worked out for Ohio State. Here's another one for Michigan fans. The 2019 Fiesta Bowl for Ohio State, where Ohio State completely dominated the first half against Clemson, kicked 3 field goals, and then had a couple little wonky plays, and they dominate the first half, and they go into the locker room, like, I think it was 16-14. I think it was like the same, because I kind of got the same vibes off of the Michigan Penn State game, because I think it was 16-14 there as well, where it was just dominate the first half, and then it's 16-14. It was like, what? How is this still a game? And you can't do that against better competition. Here's a hot take for you, Tony. 2019 Clemson, better than 2022 Penn State. That's why you can get away with it against 2022 Penn State. You are playing teams better than 2022 Penn State coming up in the next month or so. So, yeah, I think the red zone thing is a concern because, you were talking earlier about, McCarthy in the red zone. That first red zone trip, they had on 3rd and 5 or whatever it was on that first drive, he had a guy out wide to the left and just missed the throw. Open receiver, just straight up missed the throw. And, if you're going to be worried about stuff, this is the kind of stuff that will catch up with you at some point against better opponents. I'm very surprised that Michigan made Penn State look the way that Michigan made Penn State look, but you're going to be playing teams starting Thanksgiving weekend and possibly in late December and or early January. You're going to be playing teams better than Penn State, and you got to be able to execute. You got to be able to convert for 6 and not 3 in the red zone.
Couple of things. First, the 1996 Michigan game. Now, I was in the stands. I left that game at halftime to celebrate a win. I'm not sure what you were talking about. So you might want to fact check that.
The first 30-minute game in Ohio State football history. Yes.
So I'm not sure what you're talking about there, but then, yeah, the red zone success rate, touchdown success rate in the red zone. Ohio State 27 of 29 this year. Michigan 26 of 36. They failed basically 10 times to score touchdowns in the red zone and have kicked 10 field goals. So that's a lot. So just you said it perfectly. Like, this is what we do when we talk about Ohio State. You're like, look the minutia stuff where like this could show up because we've seen it show up so many times. And yeah, CJ Stroud's only completing 68% of his passes. That's below normal. That's not good enough. That sort of thing where you're comparing things to a perfection almost. And we've only talked about the Michigan defense or offense so far, like the first 29 minutes of the show. And we don't need to go another 29 minutes. But the defense is almost as dominating as the offense in this game. And Michigan had 2 drives in the first half that took longer than all of Penn State's first half time of possession. Like, Penn State had like just over 6 minutes of time of possession in the first half, and they had no hope. Michigan held Penn State to 111 yards rushing. Now, mind you, 62 of that came on one run by Sean Clifford on a read keeper, and they shut down Nicholas Singleton, who was averaging, like 7 or 8 yards a carry. They held him to 19 yards on 6 carries. Katron Allen, their other talented freshman who's playing well, 16 yards on 6 carries. They shut those dudes down. Sean Clifford, 7 of 19 passing for 120 yards, a very basic offense. Then he gets knocked out and Drew Aller comes in and looks terrified at times, like terrified and frankly slow on the run, like looked markedly slower than Sean Clifford, who's not the fastest guy, but he's fast enough to bust a 62-yarder on you, and he can do that. But overall, like there are no like individual standouts for Michigan's defense, which is I think a good thing as well, where it's not just one guy, it's everybody. I do think there was a fourth down play where Penn State threw the ball and they attacked Mike Sainristil, which is dumb. I'll just say that was a dumb play. Like if you're going to attack anybody on like a corner route, don't throw like a 18-yard corner route with Mike Sainristil in coverage. He's like one of their top 3 players. Do something else.
Yeah, Penn State, I'm just going to read through Penn State's first half drives, and I'm going to subtract the 62-yard Sean Clifford run, because that was just, that's kind of a weird one-off, and, that's not something that, if CJ Stroud has a 62-yard run against Michigan, Michigan has bigger problems, and we're probably having a very different conversation after that game. But, I'm going to subtract that 62-yard run. Here's Penn State's first half possessions. 3 plays, 8 yards, 3 plays, 6 yards. The rest of that Sean Clifford drive was 6 plays and 13 yards, and then a kneel down at the end of the half. That's it. That's Penn State's entire first half minus that Sean Clifford play. The Sean Clifford play was also a great chance to remember the JT Barrett eventual touchdown run against Minnesota in 2014, the game where it was 15 degrees, and he had this like long, it was like the tortoise and the hare, but a touchdown where he was like, well, he got there eventually. Sean Clifford got tackled at the 5, but yeah, that was a fun callback to the eventual JT Barrett touchdown on that one. Yeah, Michigan's defense, man. I have 2 notes on Michigan's defense, and it feels a lot like there's a lot of overlap between the defense and the offense. Number one, they are just whooping people's butts on the line of scrimmage, just absolutely just taking souls on the line of scrimmage. So, that's very similar to how they've kind of controlled the line of scrimmage on offense. The other thing is, it feels like they have not played a team that can really stress them vertically. I feel like I've been saying this for 2 years. What does it look like when you try and stress them vertically? Because I think Penn State took 1 shot downfield in the first 3 quarters and completed it, and that was Sean Clifford down to. I'm scrolling through my notes here. I can't find it, but it was like a 51-yarder downfield. To Harrison Wallace, and the coverage was good, but that. You can. That is something that I have for 2 years thought, why don't people do this? Because it feels like the defensive backfield for Michigan has been largely untested. And, no offense to, Harrison Wallace and Sean Clifford, but Marvin Harrison is probably better than Harrison Wallace, and CJ Stroud is probably better than Sean Clifford. So if Ohio State, last year, Michigan's defensive front got there so quickly that Ohio State, that and the weather last year probably controlled Ohio State's deep passing attack, some combination of those. But, if the weather's decent this year and the Ohio State offensive line can block, can give CJ Stroud 3 seconds in the pocket, 4 seconds in the pocket, I am still very curious whether that's a spot where you can take advantage of Michigan, because they really, even Georgia last year didn't really have the offense that was going to take advantage of you in that way. So I still think, I think, we've talked about 3 or 4 different, kind of interesting questions about Ohio State and how they match up against Michigan as opposed to everyone else that matches up with Michigan this year. I think that's another good one on the other side of the ball. If Ohio State can throw the ball downfield, how does Michigan hold up against that?
Well, and this is something I mentioned last week, and it still holds true now. Michigan's defensive line has 2 sacks all year in non-obvious passing situations. And so if you can throw deep on first down or second and short, and if you can hold up against the pass rush and hold up against the blitz, try. And I know you probably have Penn State and other teams Maryland or Connecticut wanting to we don't want to give them the ball right back because it's going to be 4 more minutes before we give it. So we can't waste downs by taking shots. We've got to get 4 yards on first down rather than trying to get something downfield. And it takes a different mentality, I guess. And we will see that, we might see that against Michigan State with, we have nothing to lose. So let's get Jaden Reed involved. They've got some good receivers. So frankly, that's the first game where you might see it just downfield. We don't care. We're just going to do it. And if it doesn't work, we'll try to, when we get the ball back, we're going to try it again because we know we can't run the ball. The only thing that we can do is throw the ball. So even if it's max protect and you're just sending 3 verticals, something like that where, just you've got to do something. And that's one area where there is some mystery. And right now, I think mystery is probably the best thing going for the Spartans. And good luck to them. But yeah, overall, just another impressive day. Like Mike Morris, no sacks, but he did a really good job setting the edge against the Penn State running game. Looking through, Jamon Green got injured, cornerback, not sure what his status is, but then you just have William Johnson, the freshman, come in and basically debacle Sean Clifford and almost knock him out of the game. I think he might have been feeling that one in the fourth quarter and wanted to get some rest after this one. But overall, another dominating game for Michigan, outscoring opponents 42.7 points to 12 points. So outscoring opponents by 30 points per game this year, just as we predicted. Tom, we don't have to take credit, but we did say Michigan would come in probably 11-0, maybe 10-1. They got past the Iowa game that I thought before the season, well before the season. I thought, hey, way before the season, I thought, watch out for that Iowa game. But so here they are, well on their way. Unless, they've got, here's the rest of their schedule for those of you who are listening. Michigan State in 2 weeks. They've got this week off. Then that Michigan State game is in Ann Arbor. Then they are at Rutgers. Then they have Nebraska at home, Illinois at home, and then they're at Ohio State. And Illinois might be the Big Ten West representative this year in the Big Ten championship game. They may be ranked, but that game will be in Ann Arbor. And it's just another one of those that might be 13-10 at the half and then ends up 34-10 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, we are at the point of the schedule where it feels like, I think we learned a lot about Penn State last weekend. And so that was, that has been sort of circled as the toughest road game on Ohio State's schedule this season. So, and with Talia Tagovailoa suffering an injury, the Maryland game maybe doesn't look quite as daunting. I think we're at the point where unless something stupid happens for Ohio State in State College, or something really stupid happens with Michigan State and Michigan, and when has that ever happened before? You're looking at 11-0 Michigan and 11-0 Ohio State. I think you need something stupid to happen for that to not be the case. Maybe we have seen Michigan State receivers go crazy. Who was the guy in 2020 who had 200 yards receiving against Michigan, and then it was something White. Ricky White. There you go. You remember the first name. I remember the second name, the last name. There we go. This is why we work so well together. You just remember the first names. I get the last names, and we're all set. You have seen, kind of the crazy, stupid game, and last year's Michigan State team, really tore Michigan's defense up as well. So maybe something stupid there. Maybe Ohio State goes into Penn State, and you have just the crazy game, and you get the blocked field goal and the blocked punt or whatever. But yeah, boy, I am already excited for 11-0 Ohio State and 11-0 Michigan on the Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend. I had 2 other notes here that I haven't gotten to yet. Neither one particularly on topic. Number 1, Michigan, take those blue pants and burn them.
Yes.
Those color rush uniforms always look so stupid. Like the Browns, all brown. They're so stupid. Burn those blue pants. Wear your normal uniforms. They look nice. It's great. Just wear them. The traditional Michigan uniform against the traditional Penn State road uniform, that's just such a classic one. And it's just oh, look, all blue. Great. Well, that's just tremendous. Yes, get rid of those. Number 2, James Franklin, Tony, going for it on 4th and goal from inside the 1 when they were down 13-0 right before half. It was oh, look at that. James Franklin is making good game management decisions. Good job. That's tremendous. So, yes, I was very excited for James Franklin for a very brief moment. Very excited for James Franklin there. But yeah, other than that, what are the chances, 0% to 100%? What are the chances we see 11-0 Michigan coming to 11-0 Ohio State in a month? Because it feels like it's north of 80%. And the question is, how far north of 80%?
Well, I was thinking between 88 and 92%. So, and yes, they're like we said, maybe in the morning show, they're going to be favored by double figures in every game up to that game. And obviously Michigan won't be favored in Columbus, but somebody's going to have to be upset in a very stupid way to not have this be an 11-0 matchup of probably the number 2 and number 3 team, because Tennessee or Georgia will be number 1 at that point. And then Ricky White, Tom, I've got the numbers here. 8 catches for 196 yards and a touchdown against Michigan. He finished with, and I said 8 catches for 196 yards. He finished the season with 10 catches for 223 yards. So the Michigan killer. At first it was Troy Smith as the Wolverine killer, and then it was Ricky White as the Wolverine killer. There has been no other Wolverine killers since, except maybe Justin Fields.
Yeah, that was definitely the weirdest thing to happen in the calendar year 2020, no question, especially college football. The Ricky White game, yes, absolutely.
Do you know where he transferred to?
Obviously not anywhere in the Big Ten, because I don't remember him blowing up against Michigan again. So no, I do not, in fact, know.
He is actually, this year, he is at UNLV. And he's 33 catches, 444 yards, 4 touchdowns. Started the season with 8 catches for 182 yards and 2 touchdowns against Idaho State.
The Michigan of the West. Michigan is the champions of the West. Idaho State, the champion, the Michigan of the West.
And one last thing on that 2020 season, just looking at Michigan State's schedule, Iowa's number 17 that year when they played, or when they finished. Indiana finished number 7 that year. Northwestern number 15 that year. Ohio State, of course, number 3 that year. Just some very, very odd looking numbers now that we look back on it compared to where those teams are currently. Certainly very, very far from the rankings. Tom, I have nothing else from the my other note here is that Penn State's offensive line is bad again. Still bad. Still bad. I thought Nick Singleton had made some changes there, and he has, but they're still not a very good offensive line. As we saw, there's so many times they're just whiffing on guys in space and, getting beaten, like getting shed and stuff like that. That's good job by the defensive line, but there's just times where they're looking for somebody to block as guys are running by them, and it's really ugly. Anything else?
We normally do this on the morning show, but Tony, 40 days until the Ohio State Michigan game. Almost there. That's
doable. Like, you can count that down. Obviously, you can count any number down.
As we have proven over the years on the morning show, yes, you can literally count any number down.
That's a great thing about numbers. Anyway, that will do it for this episode. As I mentioned, we will be having a listener questions episode dropping later, like tomorrow or midnight-ish after this one, trying to give you guys some extra content. Not extra, just trying to get back to our regular schedule. But we will be talking about the Michigan game in there as well, because that's where the questions have gone. And also some Tennessee talk, as you might expect, and plenty of other things in there as well. So that will do it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in. As always, check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Think about becoming a member. Try it for a month. See what you think. You can also find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. And, of course, all of your podcast platforms of choice, as you know. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.